Interviewing is a very interesting context when considering listening because you have to be incredibly flexible with the way that you respond to other individuals. You have to really demonstrate that you're listening to the other person as both the interviewee and the interviewer, depending on which role you're taking in the context. And really and truly, all the different skills that we have reviewed over in regard to demonstrating and behaviorally making sure that you are demonstrating the other person that you're listening, also cognitively evaluating and making sure that you are discriminatively trying to understand what is being said and interpreting and that whole process of understanding. When you think about all the different micro processes involved in the HURIER model, they're all at play in the interviewing context. And the stakes are kind of high if you think about it. In the job interview, the stakes are high for you to get the job, right? In terms of a research interview, the stakes are high if you're the researcher because you're trying to get data that's very important to you better understanding the communication phenomenon that you want to understand. And so when the stakes are high, the interviewing context can put that much more pressure on you. And that pressure and that stress can add to problems and barriers to listening, in which you start to do things like get distracted, judge, where you start to anticipate your next response rather than listen to the other person. And this can be very problematic in interviewing. So I really want to encourage you in your own key informant interviews that you are finishing up and related to your job search project that you're doing. Also, in anticipating questions for your job interview, be flexible and listen carefully and effectively, and remember all the micro processes in the HURIER model, especially understanding and interpretation and evaluating and responding. In that area, we really want to make sure that you are not prejudging and that you're not responding without listening first. Now we're going to move on to talk a little bit more about another context, which is very important to all of this because we all have families. And our family relationships may be strained, they may be very effective right now, but communication in the family has a lot of implications for your own social and physical health later on in life. And there are a lot of studies that have been linked to family communication in terms of stress, in terms of your healthy relationships later on in life, both in the workplace and your own personal, especially romantic relationships and your family relationships later on, because we have a tendency to role model what we see in our own families. And so the listening context to the family is really important for us because most of us, that's where we learned social norms. This is where we learned how to communicate. This is where we learned how to build relationships first. And then we went out to schools and to organizations and we made friends. But the family is where sort of the nexus of where it began. And there are a lot of complexities that are facing the contemporary American family. We have a high number of rates of cohabitation before marriage, and if you look at the rates of cohabitation, if you cohabitate, you're less likely to get married and you're more likely to get a divorce. Also, we have higher divorce rates in the United States. We have high rates of abuse, sexual abuse and physical abuse within the family, and we have difficulties related to elder care within the family and other dependent care as families are changing. We have a number of grandparents that are now taking care of their grandchildren rather than the parents taking care of the children. For a Western industrialized country, we have one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy. We have a lot of complications that are facing the American family today. And it's not to say that we can't overcome these complications, and in some cases we need to eradicate them when you're thinking about things like child abuse, but we have a lot of complications, and so it's really important that we learn how to communicate effectively within the family. There are a number of family communication classes that are offered across the country within communication departments, and in some cases family communication is talked about within courses, especially interpersonal courses, intercultural courses, courses like listening and crisis communication courses that focus a lot on the family. We're going to talk a little bit more about specifics within the family and how to improve family relationships. We're going to begin with long-term romantic relationships. Specifically, we're going to be referring to those long-term romantic relationships that would be marriage, although they may not be legally married. Intimate relationships like marriage are marked by reciprocal self-disclosures and usually have high levels of physical, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual intimacy. That is not to say, though, that the relationship doesn't change over time, and what may have peaked in different types of intimacy can decline over time. There is a wide array of studies in relationship to different types of marriage and trying to create a typology of marriage. People have looked at traditional couples and different types of couples, but I think that Powell's levels of disclosure kind of give us a really good idea of the types of responses and information-seeking behaviors that we engage in long-term romantic relationships, and really this could be applied even outside of marriage. These levels of disclosure are cliches, facts, opinions, and judgments and feelings. And cliches are going to be, someone asks you, how are you doing? I'm fine, I'm good, I'm okay. And these are sort of the responses that we expect people to say, yet they don't give us any depth of information. It doesn't require any intimacy in terms of your self-disclosure in order to provide a cliche response. How often have your parents asked you, well, what did you do at school today? Oh, nothing. My child is 3 years old. He goes to Mother's Day Out. And at Mother's Day Out, when I pick him up, I say, well, what did you do at school today? He already tells me, oh, nothing. I'm in shock. It just completely shocks me that he's already giving a cliche answer. So I have to say, well, how was playtime? Where did you go for playtime? What letter did you learn about today? I have to start asking specific questions in order to prompt him to give me specific responses back. And that's something you have to understand about intimate relationships within the family, is that sometimes people are going to provide cliche responses and you're going to have to probe deeper in order to get facts, opinions, judgments, and feelings. Facts are more pieces of technical information about what happened. They may even be a story, but they're technical pieces of information, and it usually doesn't require a lot of me and a lot of intimacy on my part, and it's usually not very, doesn't make me very vulnerable, and it's not risky for me to give you information about facts. And so you might say, how was your day today? And you might say, well, I finished a really big report. Well, that's better than the cliche answer in terms of intimacy, yet at the same time we don't know a whole lot about that report, what was involved, what your stress level was, what you thought about the end product. That's when you get into opinions and judgments, where you might say, well, how was your day today? And I say, well, I finished a report, so a fact, and I felt like it was a really good end product, and I had a lot of satisfaction by just getting it done, and I have a lot of relief now. Now we're getting into opinions and judgments and feelings. Feelings would be the relief of having it done. Opinions and judgments would be that it was good and you're satisfied about it. So these are different levels of disclosure that we get involved in, and when you start to get patterns of cliche and fact responses, then you have to probe deeper for opinions and judgments and feelings in order to continue the level of intimacy within the relationship. Listening can be very difficult in long-term romantic relationships as people begin to take the relationship for granted and the responses that people are going to make for granted as well. And sometimes people get accused of not listening because they're watching TV or getting glassy-eyed, not focusing. And just because you can repeat the last word back to the person does not mean you necessarily listen to them. And in a long-term romantic relationship, listening is a vital part of that relationship in terms of demonstrating to the other person that you care about them. It is a message in and of itself, just listening.